Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I am Manners, and it has been such a wonderful week because we've been able to reminisce about the events of a year ago where Johnny Bairstow wandered out of his crease and Alex Carey performed one of the greatest acts in Australian cricket history. And it's all been dredged up because those stupid Poms have released their own documentary, and Ben Stokes, we've got him saying stupid stuff. So don't worry, we are going to get into all of that and all the other cricket headlines. I'm joined by Damien Watson, sports broadcaster from SEN. Damien, good evening. How are you?
Lucky to bear witness to you, Minners, to use the Ben Stokes parlance. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Oh boy, have I got those comments ready to go through later on. Before we get into the headlines, I just sort of sat back last week and really took great delight in the sort of charm of cricket. And I think being a cricket fan is we're really lucky to be following such a wonderful sport. And 2 days last week really for me sort of was the epitome of what being a cricket fan is. So on Tuesday, Australians were watching the Afghanistan v Bangladesh T20 game to see if Australia would sneak into the semi-finals, and it had everything. It had Gulbadine with the sniper from over the boundary, and it had drama, and it just lit up a Tuesday afternoon. And then the next night, actually not long after you and I finished our cricket podcast recording, Damien, again, cricket lit up with Lewis Kimber, who hit the fastest double century in county championship history. It was a record-breaking knock. And the great thing about 2024 is Twitter blows up about this. I could just go on YouTube and start watching the innings. And it was just, Damien, that's what I love about cricket, all the quirky little bits and pieces that come with it.
Oh, absolutely. And there's more of it now, isn't there? We got a proliferation of cricket, which is quite amazing. And I think the fact that it is almost all year round now, I think we're pretty spoiled for choice, aren't we, when you think about it? But I'll give you a bit of a counterpoint to that. Do you think we're oversaturated a bit, that it loses its novelty? I don't think we are, though. I think... given, social media plays a part, as you mentioned, but I think we appreciate things as they come through. At least we do. I don't know if we could say the same thing about others, but
look, I think there is maybe some forgettable cricket that games and series pass by a little bit more now because there's so much cricket. But I also think, in this digital age with social media and the fact that so much more cricket now is streamed on various platforms, whether it's YouTube or streaming services, there's so much more cricket to watch. And there's actually a lot of free cricket on YouTube. People say, I don't have many streaming services, but there is actually a lot of free cricket to watch on YouTube. So I'd urge you to look around there. So I think, that's one of the, charms of the modern age is, I could just turn on that county match, and you could turn on any county match. Most of them are on YouTube.
Well, even you get the highlights packages basically completed and put on social media straight away. And I think we've seen that. This is a case with a lot of sports, isn't it, Menners, where I think nowadays you don't see, unless you're an absolute nuffy like us, for instance, and it's the same with football, the football codes as well, you don't see as many people having the attention span, unless there's real drama, to watch the entire day or an entire match as it happens for its absolute duration. I think now, because everything's clicked up straight away, we're seeing a different kind of sports fan, general sports fan now, where ultimately you just watch the main highlights. Everything, there's a mini match or a main highlights package for each day's play. And I think we're getting everything condensed, and we're probably spoiled in that respect as well.
Indeed. Just a couple more things before we get into the cricket headlines. On that Louis Kimber innings I was mentioning, he hit 243 runs off just 127 balls. He hit 200 runs off 100 balls. So it's the fastest ever double century in county championship cricket. So he went at 200 for a strike rate of 200 is just incredible. He had 21 sixes, the most in a championship innings, usurping Ben Stokes' previous record of 17. But I think the most delightful stat is he hit the most runs in a county championship over, smashing villain Ollie Robinson for 43 runs. He hit 6, 4, 4, 6, 4, 4, 4, 4, and 1. And there were 3 no balls in there. So 43 runs off the over. In fact, the record for most runs in a first-class over is in New Zealand, and it's 77. And Lee Jamon, who's the head of Cricket New South Wales, and another player, hit 77 in the over. So it's not going to. I think there was some declaration bowling going on then. So I think that's why they went for so many. But it was so delightful to see Ollie Robinson smashed for 43 runs.
And I think also, just having a look at his comments after the game as well, he said that he got into almost a weird zone. He hadn't experienced anything like it before. And you do probably as a sports person, you have those occasional days where everything goes right and everything's off the beat of the bat. And yeah, he said he was almost in a bit of a trance, which is interesting. And you do hear that a lot from sports people when they're having their good days, that it becomes almost too easy.
Unfortunately, he was in a losing cause. So his team were chasing at 464. They lost by 18 runs. And Aussie Nathan McAndrew took his wicket to end the chase. But heroic stuff in a losing cause. And it's actually the highest score by number 8 or below in county championship history. I heard Ed Cowan on his podcast likening Division 2 county cricket to park cricket. And I disagree. I don't think it's quite park cricket level. But yeah, there were some innings. And yeah, as I said, that's one of the great things about cricket now. You can be following along and then just jump on and watch it.
Where do you see the, just before we move on, where do you see the standard of county cricket at the moment compared to other first-class formats?
It's hard because I see the Sheffield Shield up close, and I guess I've watched enough county cricket to know. Good question. Look, I would think it's a level below Sheffield Shield cricket. How much further below, I think, varies depending on Division 1, Division 2, depending on certain teams. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but in one of the games for Lancashire overnight, you had James Anderson and Nathan Lyon bowling at each end. So that's a pretty high standard there. Yeah. But yeah, I would think it's below Australian Sheffield Shield cricket. And I think one of the big things is in England, you do get those sort of seasoned pros that hang around the game and can make really good careers plying their trade at county cricket level. And those sort of players don't tend to hang around in the Shield system too long.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, let's get into the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcasts. So since our last podcast, the T20 World Cup has been decided. So I'll just go through the results since the last show. So South Africa humbled Afghanistan in the first semi-final, bowling them out for just 56. And actually, some news recently that Afghanistan's female cricketers who live in exile in Australia have lobbied the ICC to fund the formation of a women's team outside the control of the Taliban regime. So base a refugee Afghanistani women's team in Australia. So they've sent a letter to Greg Barclay, the chairman of the ICC, and they've asked that they've said they're unable to represent at the Afghanistan country anymore as a women's national team, and they are asking the ICC to assist in forming the team in Australia. And I guess what the issue is that, you know, money is divided up from all these ICC events and given to the Afghanistan Cricket Board, and it's somewhere in the region of, I think, around $20 million a year. And that money some of that money should be put into women's cricket, but it's not, clearly. So what they're asking for is basically some of that money should be redirected into a refugee team. I think that's the right thing to do, Damien.
I think so as well. And Australia have done a good job in, I guess, encouraging this sort of, initiative, because at the end of the day, I just don't understand. It's probably hard for us to really understand the point of view of those in the Taliban regime. I mean, it's a different culture, I suppose. There's been a lot of good work that's been done, particularly in the ACT. I think Cricket ACT have done a very good job in providing programs. I know they've done a couple of announcements surrounding players who are refugees who've come from Afghanistan and various parts of the world, and created a few competitions there in the nation's capital, which is a very, very good initiative, and I'd love to see that. What's ever happened, by the way, just on, I guess, and it's been a big topic in regards to what's happened in the T20 World Cup and bringing in the Minnow nations in general. Do you know what's happened with fair break? They had the fair break tournament the last couple of years.
I think it's still going on.
Still going? Okay.
I think so.
Because they've had a change, I think, at the top end where the founder has left. So I think they're just trying to maybe establish the next event, because they've had an event. This is where this sort of initiative comes in as well, where they, I guess, encourage people from various non-cricket nations and from areas where you have a lot of players who are refugees who come in, and they bind them together with players from, I guess, very polished cricketing nations, if you will.
It's a great way of developing up-and-coming cricketers. So, yeah, I don't know where the fair break is, but I'll find out. I know a few players, obviously, who played in it. So the ICC are meeting later this month. Hopefully they'll discuss this issue, and I do hope it's not sidelined, because I think the Afghanistan women's players deserve more. So hopefully, amidst all this, buzz around Afghanistan making the semi-finals, it's not forgotten.
It would be great to see some of the men's, and I don't know if it'll happen because it hasn't happened to a great degree yet, but if some of the men's players were to jump on board, I know, the culture's a little bit different, but it'd be nice to see that sort of equality being generated by...
I guess my issue there, is, Damien, is it safe for them to do that? That's why I don't like the way Rashid Khan behaves, and I don't like the way some of the players don't come out and say it, but then it's hard for me to judge, because they have, family and friends living in Afghanistan. Would their safety be in danger if they did say anything? So that's why I find it hard to really criticize the players. I think they're all victims in this situation. It's the ICC sitting on their hands as usual. But in that result, I guess, so Afghanistan went out. South Africa broke their men's semi-final hoodoo curse. They didn't choke. They saved that for later on. Then in the next semi-final, India beat England by 68 runs. And Joss Buttler, the England captain, had an absolute shocker. Got his tactics all wrong. And he even said afterwards, in hindsight, I probably should have bowled Moeen Ali in our innings with the way spin was playing. So the ball was turning all day, and he only bowled one spinner. So ridiculous stuff from Buttler. And what I think was most satisfying about that result, Damien, is I think it signifies the end of the England white ball era of success. They win the 2019 50-over World Cup. And in 2023, have a diabolical defence of it, absolute shambles. Then in 2022, they win the T20 World Cup in Australia, and then they lose in the semi-final of this one. And I think now, a bit like the Australian white ball team, we'll see a changing of the guard, and hopefully we won't see this kind of success ever again.
Do you reckon, though, that we'll see a change to their approach to the way they play the game? Because, as we know with Bazball, and it's probably permeated across all the formats of the game, they've played a more attacking brand. I mean, it hasn't necessarily translated to recent success, but there was a part of me that really liked the attacking way that they played the game and the vigorous approach in which they wanted to score quickly. So, there's a part of me that still actually likes the way they play, but as you know, we hate England, so there's that element as well.
Well, I don't think there's any other way you can play in modern white ball cricket, but I think they'll still play
what I mean?
game.
It has been a more attacking approach, I think, even
absolutely,
compared to what they produced before.
Was after I know it's going back a bit now, but it was really after the 2015 World Cup that they just really decided they were going to start to pick specialist white ball players. And there are a lot of hitters in England domestic cricket. You can get a lot of practice playing T20 cricket. That is sort of, you're speaking about the county system before, but with the T20 Blast and the 100, if you're a player in England, you can actually play a lot of T20 cricket. All right. So England's white ball era is over. Long may we never see one again. And that meant we had an India-South Africa final played at 10:30 in the morning local time in the West Indies. So funny to be playing a final at that time of the morning local time. Obviously worked out well for Indian TV, but a famous victory for India. They won the final by 7 runs, their second World T20 final. Virat Kohli scored 76 off 59, and Akshar Patel 47 off 31. India made 7 for 176 in their first innings. And then South Africa needed 30 of 30 deliveries with 6 wickets in hand. Then they needed 26 of 24, still with 6 wickets in hand, and they still lost. Unbelievable stuff. The biggest choke job I can remember in a long, long time. Oh, Damien, I was lucky enough to be up watching this live. It was a terrific match. Some great batting and bowling. Bumrah was exceptional in the second innings, 4 overs, 2 for 18. I guess going back to the beginning, I thought after the first innings, India's 7 for 176 was about par.
Yeah, I always had the same feeling. Yep.
And I do think had India lost, which was very likely at one stage, that you would look back on that Virat Kohli innings and think maybe he should have put the foot down a bit more. Like he got to his 50 off 48 deliveries, and then he accelerated. So he finished well, but did they leave runs out on the table if he'd put the foot down a bit earlier? So, I think it's all smiles for Kohli now, but it could have been the opposite.
Yeah, but these things are very easy to look back on in hindsight. And he is that type of player. I mean, he is often in control of his temperament when it comes to the way he scores and his scoring rate. So I think ultimately, and you get 76 off 59. I know, as you said, he accelerated a little bit further in his innings, but I think to be in a final when the pressure's on, sometimes it's natural, even at his age and his level of experience, to have those elements of nerves early in your innings. So I can understand him taking a little while to get the absolute eye in when it comes to acceleration, because there's a lot of things you have to consider. And he's a leader. I don't necessarily put any blame on him on that, even if they had lost. He still was the main reason why they got to where they were in the first place.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know if he was a bit too conservative. But in the end, happy ending for India.
Correct.
So I just think it's so funny how Heinrich Klaasen just fell for the ultimate gamesmanship by India. So it's 30 off 30 needed, South Africa. And Klaasen and Miller are just looking in superb touch. Klaasen's got to 50 off about 25 balls. He's absolutely smoking them. And then Bumrah comes on and he bowls an excellent over, just 4 runs conceded. And so it was down to 26 off 24. And then Rishabh Pant goes down, not like Gulbadine, like he's been shot, just goes down with like a knee injury and asks for it to be wrapped up. I don't know whether it was a genuine injury or not, but it slowed the game down, and you could kind of see Klaasen get a little bit in his own head. He was sort of hunched over. He didn't look relaxed at all. So right. I was getting a bit worried here. His eyes were like so wide. And so after this long break, Hardik Pandya comes on to resume after the break. And he just bowls the perfect tempting delivery. Slower ball, outside off stump, hint of movement away. And Klaasen just waves the bat at it. No conviction. You could tell the nerves, gets a fine edge through to Pant. And from there, South Africa completely fell away. And they only scored 10 runs off the next 3 overs. I mean, I can't believe how dumb Klaasen is, Damien. Like, no, I'm serious. Like, if I'm the coach, like he just fell into the trap. Like, even it would have been a wide if he didn't even play at the ball.
Yeah, but that's what pressure does. I agree. It was terrible cricket, but we've seen it so often with South Africa, haven't we, over the years? Yeah. Pressure can do funny things. I think India have been up there and in big matches, even when it's not necessarily the final, for so long and so often. Sometimes that level of experience can't be matched, and I think that ultimately proved the difference between the two sides. Pressure does strange things.
It does, and it certainly did strange things to Klaasen, because that was just a terrible shot. Admittedly, Bumrah was bowling well and he bowled another good over, but, I think you say pressure. I mean, the pressure was on India. They were a whisker away of losing another ICC final. I mean, I had the tweets loaded up with, all the scorecards from all the losing finals in the last 10 years.
Yeah, but it's complacency, maybe an element of complacency followed by pressure. I think they were in control. You can't rest on your laurels, particularly in T20 cricket at any stage, because as we've seen, he takes one bad match, one bad period, and the whole tournament can fall away. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. That's why I love T20 cricket, as much as the test matches, in my view. So, Yeah, well, I suppose maybe it's a generational thing, but it shows you how fickle things can be. You've got to be on your guard all the time and concentrate all the time.
Yeah, I thought Klaassen though. He for someone that's
He'll
played
rule
so much cricket, I
He'll
thought
rule
he
it
would.
like Alan Donald and Lance Klusener back in '99.
Well,
One moment of madness. Even when remember that '99 semi-final, Betters, he hit two boundaries
I was
that
there.
came
Of course, I
so
remember it.
crisply that the ball almost came back off the fence. It was hit that hard off Damien Fleming, and then one moment of madness where there was almost a run out, and then another moment the pressure builds up and the momentum changes.
Yeah, that's the greatest day of my life, Damien. I was there for that. Me and
Yeah.
Macca were at Edgbaston that day. I was storming the field as the Australian team embraced in the middle as Donald and Klusner trudged off. And actually, last night, or not last night, the night before, I just had it on. I wanted to watch some cricket, and I just put on highlights of that game, and I hadn't heard. I'd always heard the Bill Laurie commentary, but I'd never
Yeah.
heard the commentary that I think was sort of the English commentary. I heard a different commentary feed. Anyway, whatever. I got distracted there. But
BBC maybe back when
I
they
don't know
used
what
to.
it was. Yeah, it was the
Mm.
English feed, but wasn't as good as Laurie's. Iconic. Iconic. So it comes down to the last over. South Africa needs 16 off 10 deliveries. Sorry, 16 off the last over. And David Miller's on strike. So there's still a chance. While Miller's
Yeah.
out there, South Africa is still a chance, even though they've fucked it up completely.
Yeah.
16 off 6. Full toss, hit down the ground, and Suri Kumar Yadav takes a brilliant one-handed catch to his left, running along the boundary. But when you look at the replays afterwards, his foot was over the painted line, but not over the Toblerone that was there. So I actually don't think it was a catch. I think he got away with it. I don't think it's the biggest thing and the biggest controversy in the world. I just think, as usual, the standard of TV umpiring varies. But if you look at the rules, if your foot is over the line, that is 6, regardless of where the Toblerone is.
Well, that's the thing, because the Toblerone can be knocked back, can't it, off
Yes.
the line where it's meant to be, and it's
Yes.
not necessarily 4 if it hits in between, if it's not back in any way. So, yeah, I agree with you there. It's on the perimeter that's outlined.
So India got away with that one. And from there, it was a great catch. I'm not knocking Sky's effort, but the umpire got that wrong. India get away with it. And if that goes for 6, does South Africa win from there? It's still 50-50, but 10 off 5. The only thing is, I think it was Maharaj at the other end, and he just didn't look like laying bat on ball. So it was all up to Miller.
That's the thing.
But great scenes in Barbados as India are crowned T20 champions. They got the schedule they wanted. They got the pathway to the final they wanted, and then they got the result they wanted.
Player of the match. Farewell for Virat Kohli as well at T20 international level.
Well, it was a multiple farewell. So firstly, player of the match was Virat Kohli. Player of the World Cup was Jasper Bumrah, and his figures are just exceptional. I think he went for under a run a ball for the whole tournament. So that's superb stuff from Bumrah. But it wasn't just the end of Virat. It was also the end of Rohit Sharma and Jadeja. All announced their T20 international retirement. And it was Rahul Dravid's last game as a coach. So, it really was the end of an era for Indian T20 cricket and cricket in general.
That's right. When we reflect upon this era, Menners, I mean, there's so many great moments. I know that it's amazing, even thinking about Virat Kohli. I know he went through a bit of a hump a few years ago, and he sort of had a bit of a renaissance over the last couple of years at T20 level. Yeah. I still think back to that India, even though it wasn't a final, and I know, things were a little bit different come the end of the tournament, but that T20 World Cup match at the MCG, over 90,000 fans, India beat Pakistan. Look, this would be a great fairy tale, probably one that has to be up there in his career, but under the pressure against the old enemy in front of over 90,000 wailing fans, that to me stands out in terms of T20 international cricket in Virat Kohli's career in that level.
I agree.
Maybe I was biased if it was in Australia, but still, I love that. The thing to stand up to the pressure.
That night in Melbourne was unforgettable. In fact, I think that whole T20 World Cup in Australia was just better than this one. I just think it had a better vibe, better games,
Yeah,
better run, slightly better pitches. Not that this tournament was bad, but I just think that one really seemed to light up the cricket landscape. And I thought this one was a little bit more muted.
perhaps, but I think still it had its memorable moments, Menners. It had a great
Oh,
final,
absolutely.
and I think this World Cup will be remembered for not necessarily the rise of the minnows, but I think a greater prominence of minnows, and maybe they're no longer minnows. Some of these traditional minnow cricket nations, and Afghanistan has to be considered a threat to anyone on their day now, and people think of it as a surprise. Maybe it is to a degree, but I think back to that 2018 under-19, I think it was, World Cup, where Afghanistan were amongst the top three with Australia and India in that tournament. They had a lot of talent coming through, and we're starting to see the fruits of that talent being borne out at international level. So, even with the regime and the criticisms there, at the very least that they have developed their talent pretty well. And that was almost unfathomable 10 years ago. That Afghanistan could compete in an international World Cup tournament. We saw, look, I don't know, there's always an element of doubt about this, but even the USA beating Pakistan, that would have been unfathomable even a couple of years ago better. So I think this will be remembered, even though India won the tournament, for the greater breadth of cricketing nations standing up. And whether it made an impact in the US, I don't know. You probably have a better idea about that because you've been involved with people at Bairstow and everything else, and the few Americans who've taken a bit of an interest in the game. Did it have a bit of an impact here in the US? Because that was probably, from an ICC point of view, the main aim this tournament.
I think it certainly did make ripples in the US. And from all reports, the digital consumption out of the US was pretty high. So I think that can be this World Cup's legacy is, what did it do for American cricket? Did it just help sort of stimulate the growth of cricket there? And we'll see. I think only time will tell, how that goes. But, India win the World Cup, but then like most of the journalists, they were stuck in Barbados because of Hurricane Beryl. So apparently they've just flown out of Barbados and heading back to India finally after 2 or 3 days. I know a lot of Aussie journos were stuck there. I think everyone was okay, so that's the main thing. But
you wouldn't mind being stuck in Barbados, actually.
They're probably in a hurricane.
True.
Well, we've just talked about the T20 World Cup, but this T20 World Cup did make me think about whether winning the 50 over World Cup means more than winning the T20 World Cup. So I've got a few responses here from the listeners. I thought there'd be a great starting point. So Luca Gerges, it does to me, but probably not to the players. 50 over cricket, unfortunately, becoming extinct. That's an interesting question, whether the players value one more than the other. I would think financially winning the T20 World Cup would be good at getting jobs at franchise level, practically.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think, just from my point of view, I think we're still at a point where the 50 over World Cup still holds more prestige, but I think T20 international cricket, when it comes to the World Cup in isolation, it's probably the same with 50 overs as well, but I think with the T20s, it is starting to catch up. It means more, I think, to the players than it did 10 years ago and certainly 15 years ago. Remember, it was sort of a bit of a novelty when it first started back in the late 2000s. But I think it is starting to mean a little bit more in the mainstream when it comes to how the players feel. It is a World Cup after all. Maybe due to the, I guess, frequency of it over the last few years with COVID impacting everything, maybe you can make an argument it doesn't mean as much, but I think it is growing in regards to its relevance and its significance to the players and how much the players want to win it. But I still think 50 over cricket, when it comes to the World Cup, not talking about just general series, but when it comes to the World Cup, I still think it holds a bit more prestige because it's been around longer.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think the fact that it's played every 4 years makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
And if they actually wanted to make the T20 World Cup as prestigious, I think that's what you need to do, is you'd want to have it. So 4-year cycles for each tournament, the T20 World Cup and the 50 over World Cup, and you have one every 2 years. But I don't think the ICC will do that because It's a lot of money. And I think as well, because of what we spoke about it before the breakout, the associate nations are really using T20 cricket as a area of growth and a way of being involved with international cricket more, as opposed to 50 over cricket. They want the T20 World Cup every 2 years because it gives those associate nations something to strive for every 2 years. So it is complicated. Joel writes he thinks the one day World Cup is worth the most, then the T20 World Cup, then the Test World Championship. And there's another one, Damien, because I would say personally, I think the World Test Championship win means more than a T20 World Cup win.
But it hasn't been around for that long. It does come down to the length of time, doesn't it, that it's been around?
No, I think Test cricket is just a more meaningful game, and therefore, so for example, I think Australia's win in the World Test Championship final means more than India's win in the T20 World Cup.
But I'll pose this to you: when it comes to the Test format, would you rather win a World Test Championship or an Ashes series against good opposition? It might be different because they go through cycles. But would you rather win an Ashes series or a Border Gavaskar trophy against good opposition, or a World Test Championship?
Well, it's interesting because I hate the English, so I'm biased. But I would say generally a World Test Championship. Like in India, India, they won the Border Gavaskar trophy, but then they lost the big game against us not long after last year. So, but the Ashes probably, an away Ashes, if you'd said to me last summer, would I take an away Ashes or the World Test Championship, I would have taken the away Ashes.
It still felt, as much as it was a significant achievement, it still felt like the entree to the Ashes series, didn't it? That World Test Championship match and the final. I think it'll grow. I think ultimately we need to get used to it. And you got to remember too, there's a lot of complexity when it comes to it as well, because you got to look at the standard of opposition which each team faces. And I guess also the health of their squad as well. Because things change, because it's stretched over such a long period of time, whereas it's a bit more compact in the T20s and the one days. So they're completely different, aren't they?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, when you look at the trophy cabinet, for me, I think you'd probably have one day World Cup, Test Championship, T20 World Cup. But as you say, the Ashes for an Australian player means, more than anything. It's just up there with winning a World Cup. So
it comes down to tradition. That's I think it'll grow when it comes to its relevance and its significance. It'll grow as time goes on, I think.
All right, here we are, Tuck Tuck Till I Die cricket podcast. I think for players, all these trophies would mean a lot. They might not have low to high priority given the competitive nature of an athlete. Yeah, maybe. But Tuck Tuck, I was more talking about just like from a philosophical point of view, what means more. Of course, you're a player, you kind of want to win everything. But I would still say as a player, I mean, it'd be interesting to ask David Warner, say, who won 250 over World Cups and a T20 World Cup, which means the most to him. I'll find out for you. You know what, Tuck Tuck? I'll find out for you. It'll be my project for summer 2024-25. I will ask players what means more to them. Because there's enough players running around the Big Bash who've won both. I mean, that's the great thing about, covering Australian cricket. There's so many winners in the Australian team. It's born winners. Yeah. All right, Connor. I think the constant ICC events are diluting all World Cups. I feel like saturation always leads to less impact. Even the FIFA World Cup would lose luster if it was on every year. So I'd agree with that. And it was a bit like he proposes the 4-year cycle like we were speaking before.
Yeah.
I guess like the oddity is when you get things like next year there's a proposed 50 over Champions Trophy in Pakistan, which does come across as just a money-making machine for the ICC. Because what does it mean? You've got the World Cups in 50 over and 20 over cricket, the Champions Trophy. What is it?
Well, I think that's always been the case with the Champions Trophy, hasn't it? Even in the days where there were less of these compact tournaments involving international teams. For Australia, I remember the only reason it gained a lot of, or garnered a lot of attention when it did come round was because it was the one tournament we couldn't win manners during our golden era. It knocked out. That was the only reason people sort of tuned in. So, it was always seen as a bit of a poorer cousin to the 50 over World Cup, wasn't it?
And I can see how that dilutes it. So good stuff from Connor. I agree. When I pour, I rain. Yes, it does, but 50 over cricket is a dying format. So, yes, he agrees that 50 over World Cup means more. But it's interesting, the bilateral 50 over cricket is dying, but I still think like the last two 50 over World Cups have been
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, the one in India, Australia won, obviously we're biased because Australia won, but it was a great tournament, even though it was a
Yep.
long tournament. And the one before that in England that England won. So, yeah, maybe bilateral 50 over cricket is on the wane, but I think the World Cup still hold a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we've seen with the crowds for some of the bilateral one-day matches. Yeah, there's no doubt that's on the well. When I say on the way out, they'll still probably have it. But look at the Australia v West Indies one-day series we had earlier this year, Metters, in the calendar year. There was barely anyone at the MCG for that one day that they had. Like, it was almost like a Sheffield Shield game. Seriously.
Absolutely. Gilly, T20 cricket is oversaturated. And it is hard to get enthusiastic about it. Gilly, well, sort of agree with you. I think a World Cup every 2 years is a little bit harder to get excited. Amelius Victor, T20 World Cup is a consolation prize. Not sure it's something worth crying over when you win it. I don't think it's quite a consolation prize. I think that could be a bit harsh, but I would take Australia's 650 over World Cups over any T20 World Cup win.
Yeah, I agree. It's not worth crying over a victory in great elation, but there is still, I think it is rising in significance.
Yes. Chris Rose, no question. Thank you, Chris, for agreeing with me. SK7, by that logic, winning away Test series is the pinnacle of cricket. Now, this sounds like an Indian fan referring to those two Indian series victories here, and I agree that is the pinnacle of Test cricket, coming to Australia and beating us on our home shore. And, I would liken that to Australia playing a World Cup final in India's backyard and winning it. So
yeah.
by that logic, we are both nations are at the pinnacle of cricket.
Yep.
All right, so that was some great fan feedback on which World Cup means the most. Congratulations, India. I think what we've got to in this conversation is your World Cup victory means not as much as maybe you think it does. No, I'm just joking. Indian fans, don't destroy my social medias, please. All right, now let's get into some more news. As I said at the top of the show, it's been a year since the Johnny Bairstow incident. It's been hard to believe it's been a year, Damien, isn't it?
Oh, it goes so quickly, doesn't it? As we get older, man, as life travels a lot quicker, and it's been good. We've had the Australian behind-the-scenes look at what happened. Now we've got the England behind-the-scenes look.
Definitely, and I think, as I've said before, that my reflection on the Bairstow incident is that it really showed that when you get to the core of Australia and English cricket, they are intrinsically different culturally, and that is why there is this friction when we come up against each other in the Ashes. That there's just it's just we just don't fit together. It's not the same, and we'll never look at cricket the same. And they have released, the English cricket team has released their own 3-episode series about the Ashes. It's called the Ashes 2023 Our Take. Now,
I
don't know where you can watch it. I saw it on the website, and I will admit I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I will suffer through it because I want to see the behind the scenes. But there is a quote here that has been publicised by cricket.com.au. Ben Stokes has claimed his team will live forever in the memory of people who were lucky enough to witness us play cricket. And as I said on Twitter, that one quote by Ben Stokes, he was just able to perfectly distill, Stokes nicely distilled down the whole distasteful arrogance of this English team into one concise sentence.
It was hilarious, wasn't it?
I mean, we'll live forever in the memory of people who are lucky enough to witness us play cricket. I mean, the real humble cricketers, your Australian cricketers, your Viv Richards, your Bradman, they go out there and say, they want to entertain the players. They want to entertain the fans.
Yeah.
They don't go out, they were so lucky to watch me play. I mean, just terrible attitude.
Yeah, I thought so as well. And I got to say, though, when I look back on it, it was great for the series, wasn't it? It really was, the whole incident itself, because there was that build-up anyway in the lead-up, as there always is, but it felt a bit different compared to previous, in the last 10 to 15 years, maybe going back even as far as '05. Did you feel, as we reflect on that series last year, that had more hype and discussion around the water cooler amongst a lot of Australians, and probably the same with English people as well? I think it really helped the game over there in the middle of summer over there. It brought it into the mainstream, a Ashes series in England, into mainstream discussion, into mainstream people's conversations, more so than ever since 2005.
Most certainly. It was a riveting Ashes series. And it's hard for me to sort of step back because I was, doing podcast after every day of the Ashes, and I was riding this emotional roller coaster so much. I mean, it was just a tumultuous Ashes series. But yes, I mean, it was drama, it was gripping, it was exciting, it was controversial. It had, like, I was ready to go over there and start a war over the way they treated our players. So, and I think it did sort of, you do get in an Ashes series where people will talk about cricket all the time. You go down to get a coffee, you with your mates, everyone's talking about the Ashes. So it does sort of break out into that popular zeitgeist.
It transcended the sporting public, didn't it, in both nations? And I think it probably, if anything, I know England didn't taste a success come the end of the series, Menners, but I felt it was good for the game there, which had probably floundered a little bit ever since they probably took the game away from free to air. In my opinion, it has floundered a bit over there, the mainstream attention surrounding the game of cricket. I think it brought it into the mainstream again for the first time in a while.
I don't care.
Well, the ODI World Cup was probably one exception over the last 15 years. That brought into the mainstream as well. But yeah, I know you don't care about the pomp, but I think
I just don't care anymore. I used to care, but now I'm just like, do we want more loutish, thuggish football fans going to cricket matches? I'd rather.
I think it's great.
No, I'd rather it'd be better if there's less people in the ground. Like, the fans there are awful. I do understand that they have a different sporting landscape in that football dominates all year in England, and you cannot get a space in the headlines. So I do see there's a different landscape. But after the way their fans behaved last year, I don't care. I mean, if you'd rather go and watch a football game and yell abuse at the opposition instead of yelling at it, our lovely Australian cricketers. In some irony, Johnny Bairstow has been dropped a year after the incident from the English Test side. So England are playing a test at Lords next week. Bairstow's been left out for a young keeper. So I guess karma finally caught up with him. Now, building up to that test match, I guess the big thing is it'll be Jimmy Anderson's final test match. And we'll certainly talk about that. But in preparation for that, James Anderson took 7 for 35 in a county match as he prepares for his last test match. And as I said before, he and Nathan Lyon were bowling at each end for a little period. And but Nathan Lyon was standing in mid-off a lot of the time. And here's what Nathan Lyon has said after the day. Doing what he did this morning was pretty amazing to witness. I've obviously seen it when I've been on the other side, when I'm not standing there saying, come on, Jimmy. So that was amazing to watch and amazing to be a part of. It feels a little bit sick, me saying, come on, Jimmy, and him saying, nice, Gary. When I first signed for Lancashire, that was one of the big draw cards to hopefully bowl in a partnership with Jimmy. Great quotes. I mean, Lyon has become a wonderful statesman as he nears the end of his career, says all the right things. But I do like that little bit of honesty when he says, it feels a little bit sick, me saying, come on, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, that's born out of the rivalry, as we know. But yeah, it's been great watching, as much as, we're Australian and everything. But Jimmy Anderson, you got to give him credit to stand the test of time. I can still remember, Menners, there was a one day out that Australia played against England back in late 2002 at the MCG.
That was his debut.
Correct, and they didn't have the name. This is how unknown he was. Didn't have a shirt with his name at the back or a number. It was just blank blue. That's how unknown he was. And I remember he made his debut, and that was the day Ponting and Gilchrist put on a masterful partnership. And it was also the match Shane Warne did his shoulder, I think, from memory as well. So that will be remembered for Jimmy Anderson's debut. I still remember that. Still remember how youthful he looked, and still in pretty good. I know he's a bit slower around the field these days, but still looks in pretty good shape considering.
Yeah, he does look in great shape. But time for him to go. Way too old. Way too old to be playing Test cricket. Just staying over in England, some Australian performances. Cameron Bancroft made 184 in the last round of county cricket. And Nathan McAndrew, who I mentioned before, he took 5 for 73. So good stuff from the Australians. All right, we're going to take go on.
Just on Bancroft, do you think, I know we had this discussion before, but given he's been consistent, can he ever break into that Australian team again?
Oh, I'm never going to rule it out completely, but I wouldn't think he'd be near the top of the queue at the moment. But things can change pretty quickly. We've seen in the past players get a little late renaissance. I don't think we would have expected Usman Khawaja to add another sort of, how many? He scored like 10 Test centuries since his recall, so wouldn't have predicted that. All right, you're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Damien Watson. We're smashing through the cricket headlines. We've got Can't Let It Go, but just one more little bit of local news. It just slipped under the radar, and a very local story, but they announced that in the upcoming WBBL, the Sydney Thunder are going to play 3 games at Drummoyne Oval, starting in middle of November. And I think it's great to have Drummoyne Oval be used again for the WBBL. I think in the last few years, the WBBL is just struggling a little bit for identity and how it does its format. And I think the Thunder has suffered because of that. The Sixers have always had the spiritual home at North Sydney Oval, but the Thunder have struggled. And I think Drummoyne Oval is a good place for them to play a few games. It's in the inner west. It's good for their fan base. And yeah, I like it. I like going to Drummoyne Oval. So, the cricket season's not far away. Winter's just a couple of months and we'll be into domestic cricket. So really excited about that.
When's the fixture going to be announced, Menas, in the coming weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we get it in the next week or two. So, yeah,
Looking
I think
forward.
the WBBL...
every year.
Yeah, same. The WBBL, I think, will be out later this week. But, yeah, just nice to see Drummoyne Oval being used. To me, it sort of typifies what the WBBL is about. Areas for the families, looking over the water, holds about 5,000 people, which is sort of, if you can get 5,000 people to a WBBL game, you're doing really well. All right, now let's wrap it up with Can't Let It Go, that little bit of cricket news you just can't let through to the keeper. Damien, what's your Can't Let It Go this week?
I've got a couple if it's all right, Menas.
Yeah,
Firstly, it was announced in recent hours, actually, that Marizanne Cap is going to the Melbourne Stars. So one for the Victorians out there, the Melbourne Stars. Well, I think they made the final. I know, the 2 Melbourne men's teams haven't been great for a while, but the Stars did make the final going back, I think it was during the Sydney Hub season in 2020, the WBBL. But both Victorian teams have struggled probably over the last few years when you look at it holistically. So that's a great acquisition for the Melbourne Stars. And it'll be a good blend of youth and experience. They've developed a lot of youthful players like Sophie Day and Tess Flintoff, etc., who's probably been affected by injury a fair bit, but Sophie Day had a bit of a breakout season. So that's starting to look like a pretty decent attack. And also, I noticed probably pretty quietly as well earlier this week, they announced an Australia A fixture, I think for both the men's and women's. So Australia A are playing India A in the men's. I think, from my understanding, they're going to play 2 tour matches, one in Mackay, the men's, and then one at the MCG, I think in early November. And the women's are going to play their fixtures in August. So that's not far away. That's just next month. Just made me think it's a bit hard in the cluttered fixture and schedule of the Australian Summer to fit Australia A matches in. But part of me with my childhood would like to see more of it. We don't see a huge amount of it each summer. It depends who's coming out here, really.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some good stuff next summer with India A and Australia A in both men's and women's battling it out. And I agree with you. When you get that kind of extra test match where it's, Australia A versus India A in either one, I think it'll be exciting. All right, my Can't Let It Go. Actually, it's all women's cricket. God, Can't Let It Go has been a women's cricket, mainly women's cricket theme tonight. So South Africa played India in a women's test just completed yesterday. Sorry, the day before, whatever. It was earlier this week, whenever you're listening. And again, just loved watching it. And it looked like India was going to win. They batted first, made over 600, enforced the follow on when they were bowling. But then South Africa really dug in their second innings, and they faced 155 overs. And friend of the show, Laura Vulvat, the South African skipper, made her first Test century. She made 122. I had the great pleasure of interviewing her last summer in my WBBL series. She's now captaining South Africa. And although South Africa lost by 10 wickets, it was a brave fight. Great performance by India. Shafali Verma made 205, a brilliant double hundred. But yeah, friend of the show made her first Test century, Laura Vulvat. Well done.
Yeah, Wolfie, who I think studied law as well, so very smart individual, Laura Wolfart. But she's still got plenty. She's still quite young. She's been around the system for a while, but she's still got plenty of scope for improvement as well. And I know she's in high demand here in Australia. She's been a great contributor for the Adelaide Strikers of the WBBL, and haven't they had some sort of almost a dynasty? So it'll be interesting to see whether they can back up again this summer. And she's obviously a very key part of the tournament itself.
Yes, and again, just one of the charms of cricket. I do love women's Test cricket, and I think it was Monday afternoon, just had it on all afternoon as South Africa battled away to try and get to safety, but alas, they couldn't do it. So, yeah, I guess, this sort of sentiment around cricket in this episode, Damien, I think it's, we're sort of now in the middle, we're right in the middle of the cricket winter, so I'm sort of feeling the pinch now of not having any local high class cricket. So I'm yearning for the pitches to start rolled, and to hear the sound of leather and willow and
AFL and NRL not doing it for you, Miners.
Not at all, unfortunately, not at all. All right, well, I guess sad way to wrap things up, Damien. No, I'm just joking. There'll be lots of cricket though. The Major League Cricket starts, I think, next week, and we've also got the England Test summer starting soon, so there will be lots of cricket to talk about. As I said, Cricket Unfiltered will be going right through winter, recording regular episodes. Damien, where can the listeners catch up with you?
On Twitter at Damo_Watts, so DAMO_WATS.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at Amenas. Please rate and review the podcast on your favourite app. Share it with your friends, and we'll be back.
Comment.
Yes, please.